that would be just fine. I'll be happy to take questions on this, and I will repeat the questions so folks that are listening elsewhere can hear them. So, any questions? Put your hands up high so I could see them. Yes, sir. Theron.
One of the things that I've encountered, and anyway, how would you, it seems like a useful way to get the message out about the dangers of technology is to make optimal use of technology. Hey, post on Twitter, Facebook, all the social medias about, how dangerous they can be. How have you, obviously you have a paper newsletter, so what would you besides the obvious, what would you advise?
So, so Theron asked a good question. I think very relevant is that one of the ways, to warn people about technology is to use technology. I'm warning people about AI and some of the perils to our communities right now, and it's being live streamed over Facebook. So I wonder if they're fact checking this. What do you think, Rory?
Don't ask me.
Don't ask Rory. He wouldn't know if they were. So one caveat, and you might encounter some of this opposition too, where you're like, well, we really believe that we should be more self-sufficient and be less reliant on, distant supply chains and factories in China. I think like manufacturing in China, which is like, I hope you don't have to have that argument after 2020 because it should be made for you by now. But before 2020, it used to be more of a critique. And you might hold that position of like, we should be more self-sufficient, and someone will say, but you still shop at the grocery store, you're a hypocrite. And you're like, well, we're not there yet, right? But I think one way to look at that is, it's kind of like saying, someone who is enslaved, unjustly enslaved, can't escape using the roads that their masters built. What would that even, what does that mean? I think it's perfectly acceptable and not hypocritical to utilize tools that exist at your disposal as long as your orientation is trying to move and trying to approach a more sustainable way. So using, whether you use technology or not in trying to get your message out, one of the ways this comes into play a lot is in promotion and marketing. And I wonder if that's maybe part of what you're referring to. Twitter and Facebook and, email lists. We use email, but we don't use Twitter or Facebook. That's a tough question, and I don't know exactly the right answer to it. One of the things that I do know is that as a technologist, over the decades that I've been doing this, the engagement on the easy-to-use mass communication tools is always the worst. And what I've personally found is that the slow effort of developing relationships always yields the best result in the long run. And what we started this newsletter 7 or so years ago, I'm not sure, and we did start it as like an online email. And it was just a fun thing that we were sharing what our family's doing on a farm. It was nothing, had no idea this would ever be a thing. Like it would ever grow to multiple thousands of people reading it. But I distinctly remember just this switch of, I want to do something that's tangible, that people put in their hands. I want to go against that flow. And for us, it's actually been a huge benefit. Even though it's a lot more expensive, there's something about the tangible nature of things that goes against the current. And I think personally, it has yielded a much bigger benefit to our, if you would call it a business, it's our home-based family economy. It's not a major corporation or anything, but for us, I think it's been a very beneficial thing. More beneficial is the face-to-face time. So we're here, we're developing relationships face-to-face in person. Those are things that take a lot of time. They take a tremendous amount of expense and effort, but I think in the long run of it, they actually set us apart. It's a competitive advantage. I don't like to use the word competitive, but it's a distinctive that that we bring, and there's only one of us. We're not reproducible. A relationship, you can't just multiply a relationship. And so we are able to develop authentic relationships with people that we otherwise wouldn't. So I don't know if that helps at all. I actually think the fact that we have physical addresses and we can say whatever we want to whomever we want about whatever we want, I think that's pretty cool. This is a medium for truth for us, and we're now in a day where truth is being corrupted. So, by the way, get on the Homestead newsletter. It's free. We'd be happy to send you out a copy if you want to find out what's going on and be encouraged. That's at gatherandgrow.us if you ever want to just go sign up. Totally free. Other questions? I think I saw another at the back. Yes, is that Richard?
It is.
Hey, Richard.
So you're not the only person that's telling us about the harmful nature of AI. Elon Musk, who owns Twitter, maybe you don't know him, but he owns Twitter. So he's also saying we need to regulate this, and he's not the only person that is the head of a giant technology that's calling for that. What would you suggest that our government do to regulate it?
Elon, I quote Elon in our book, in my book, and he was part of an organization called the Future of Life Institute. He was either signed one of their petitions or was involved, was on their board of directors. But they were talking about this whole slaughter bots thing that I was telling you about before. These things. That language was from their website, and they were warning about this, many years ago when they were seeing the evolutions, that nations need to sign basically a commitment, a ceasefire to ever use AI to these ends. And unfortunately, it just takes a couple of bad actors to start using it, and then everyone has to do that. So he was warning back then, when we're playing with AI, this is like summoning the demon, is what he said. Once it's out, it's out. In terms of how to regulate, I think it's valiant and noble to try to do anything and everything you can do. He's advised for a pause. I think that was the latest that I saw from just an industry pause on further development beyond where it is right now, so that we can kind of catch up and think through some legislation, because of course legislation always follows behind innovation. I think it's wise. I mean, I agree with them. I think we should do that. I honestly think we need to be building our arks right now. I don't have a lot of faith in government to solve this problem. Ultimately, even if the American government decides to play ball on this, what's China going to do? They're a couple years away from having the same tech if they want it. And where are they going to deploy it? And so I really think, now this is both kind of a warning and I think it's optimistic. My wife likes to call me a sober-minded optimist because I am sober-minded about a lot of these things, but I actually think it's going to lead to something good and beneficial. If something scary like this causes families to pull together and start to rebuild at home and become more self-sufficient and link together with other families who are trying to build authentic Christian community, and maybe there's some rough patches ahead for all of us, right? I mean, Americans are not used to the kind of rough patches that other Christians have had to endure for centuries around the world, even to this day. So there's a lot of stuff that we're just not used to. That's part of the normal experience of the Christian life. But I think that the other side of that, I think, is going to be good. I'm very optimistic about what it means for our families and communities. We've seen the fruit in our own family, and we've seen the fruit. This fulfillment, I talked about this deep, unmet longing that technology is constantly chasing after. And I think that's met in the relationships. And I think that's what's going to get restored. Not for everybody, but for those who have ears to hear. Good. Yes?
What would you say is a good medium of exchange in those family-centered economies or communities? Like, we see the instability of like the dollar and currencies.
Question was, what's a good medium of exchange and alternative to the debased currencies that we have? Well, I'll say it this way. It's a simple answer, but it's not an easy one. It's barter. And it's simple because, and it's proven, there were no banks at the founding of our country. I think the first bank showed up in like 1790, so not until the ratification, maybe even a little later. There were no banks because there just wasn't a need for it. People exchanged commodities that they grew themselves at home. I mean, you grew your own money. No, it wasn't perfect, but it was very stable. I track the price of butter from 1631 to present. And what's really interesting is prior to the Federal Reserve passing the, what was that? Oh, well, no, it was Congress passing the Federal Reserve Act. 100 years ago, 1913 was the inception of the central bank in America. But up to that point, for the first, 300 years of people living here, there was no central bank, and the price of things was like a flat line. I mean, the price of butter increased or decreased basically a dime over 400 years. And then it shot up exponentially after the Federal Reserve started becoming the sole supplier, had the monopoly on the currency because they debased it, which is why countries have central banks, is debased currency. So I don't think that barter is an easy solution, but I think that it is the solution that we're going to go back to, and we're all going to be figuring it out because we'll have to. I don't really know. I think it's a great question. It's one that I've spent some time thinking on, and I don't have the exact answer for you on that, but I think that is the answer. Yes, another question right here next.
Since you're coming from a technology-minded place, would you argue that technology can be neutral and can be used for both good and bad? And if so, AI is not created by itself, it's programmed by humans, you can obviously input whatever negative or positive they want into it. Would you argue that people that are believers, that have the ideas of what's happening, should be encouraged to actually understand what that is and utilize their skills to negate some of the negative input that's being used by people with those beliefs for that?
Okay, let me see if I can rephrase the question just for those listening. No, it's a great question. I don't mean to. The question was, if technology is neutral, then should believers be engaged in the positive use of that technology to counteract the negative uses of that technology? Given what industrialism has done over the centuries to tear families apart, can we do the same thing but in reverse, but still using the technology? And to that, I would answer, I agree with Rod Dreher's assessment that technology is not neutral. That there, like I had said before, there is an ethos behind the development of certain innovations that is intended to produce a certain result in society. And so it depends. The answer to the question on using technologies, it depends on what that technology is for, who designed it, and for what purpose. And so I think that there are certain categories of technologies that Christians shouldn't be involved with at all. I don't mean that you shouldn't understand it. There might be a benefit in understanding it so as to not use it. We have some old order Amish. By the way, my book made it into Pathway Publishers, which is an old order Amish book catalog. I think that's like the greatest feather in my hat is to have my book mentioned in that. But we've gotten some letters from some great families, Amish families, and I like how one of them words what's going on in just the larger sense of the internet technology and everything that the modern world has. Of course, the old order Amish have never adopted electricity, going all the way back to the early 20th century. But he calls all of this the perverted electronic circus. And I thought that's a pretty apt description for what's going on if you were to just be an outsider looking in on like what is going on in that whole internet thing, So my answer to that question is I think there are categories we should have nothing to do with. I think there are other categories that are perfectly fine. The moldboard plow is a technology that farmers use going all the way back. We have a wood burning stove. I think that's a great piece of technology, very handy, especially in Minnesota winters. But other things too, different forms of communications and some of these things. I don't think that it's a case by case basis is really what I think. Even the telecommunications, the cell phone things. I mean, I carry a cell phone. It's a practical reality that we need to have right now. But actually, I was a lot more fulfilled when we turned the power off for a week. And we had no electricity, we had no phone. There wasn't a constant bombardment of everything that's going on all the time. We don't need to know minute by minute updates of what's going on around the world. There was a deeper place of contentment. And so if I could live without it, I would. But at a place right now, we don't have a practical way to do it other than probably reducing the use of it. I don't know, was that helpful? Did it get to?
Yeah, I think so. I agree that some technologies aren't good. I just mean it's in terms of AI, for example.
In terms of AI,
It's coming regardless.
yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the point. And so people programming it for the most part right now are not generally people that are aligned with Christian community beliefs. So I'm just thinking something.
Oh, I actually have a good quote that go along with that. Sam Altman says, who's the, I guess you call him, he's the director or CEO of OpenAI who developed this tech. He said the question of whose values we align these systems to will be one of the most important debates society ever has. Right, exactly. That's the problem. Their own employees talk about their goal is to create an environment where we have AI and technology broadly amplifying human wisdom. So there's this predicated understanding that humans know best, right? What does the scripture say? There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end leads to death. And so I just don't think that they're going to arrive at a solution that's going to ultimately amplify anything I want to be part of. It doesn't mean we shouldn't understand it. The other thing that comes to mind when you're sharing that is, the old order Amish, regardless of what you believe about their way of life, they preserved a way of life. To them, it was an important way of life, and they managed. You could say the same thing. Electricity was coming, and they decided this is not something that's going to benefit our families or communities. We want to preserve this way of life, and they have. I mean, that was 120 years ago or so. So again, I'm not commenting on the rightness of a particular denomination, but the way that they approach technology is kind of interesting, is they actually have a vetting process. They use technology. They have some of the most sophisticated technology when it comes to farming that you can imagine. It's just all horse-powered. Or sometimes, diesel generators are involved. But they have a process. There's a deliberate process before they would bring a technology into a community. Another vote for community, because there's some kind of accountability between families. Not everyone is an island, but they have some kind of process of vetting technologies and deciding amongst themselves, is this something that's going to benefit our goals of community, faith? Faith, family, and community is the filter that they bring everything through. So if we had that, if that was part of our churches, if we all submitted to an accountability kind of a system where we had elders that were looking out for the best interests of the community, these are the kinds of conversations that you would have with them. Like, is AI something that we want to, be investing in? That would kind of be up to that community to decide. But I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all answer.
Could you? Yeah. Go ahead. Could you call? I saw a talk yesterday that was from the people that made Social Dilemma. That was the humane technology put on.
Tristan Harris.
Yeah. And they were talking about they call them the golems, the large language model AIs, and kind of they were calling it a double exponential curve in the sophistication of the size of these models, and now kind of the evidence of self-training and self-improvement in these, and how the change that's happened. And they had a chart, I think, of the time to 100 million users, of all these different services, and ChatGPT, was within like 2 weeks or something, and how I would like your comments on how the double exponential curve with this technology's development will impact, say, the next 5 years. I know that's spitballing, but that, and based on your book, what are your top 5? You say, like, hey, these are the ones that I think, because we'll have AI farming, we'll have AI, we'll have AI everything. But if we're sort of pulling back from that system, 2 things. Which trades maybe are top 5, 10, whatever, and is it actually going to be possible to escape the panopticon to the point that what's going to be required to actually opt out?
Okay, so he's referring to Tristan Harris. I didn't see the particular piece that you're referring to, the creator of the Social Dilemma documentary, and he was talking about the double exponential of adoption for some of these things, and just the the advancement of the tech itself. Was this the same one, Matt, that you were talking about this morning? Okay, but it was another scary-looking chart. And comments on that and what it's going to affect in the next 5 years, and also what would I recommend, like top 5 things like to do about it. Again, my number one thing is I think we have to become producers. We have to become self-sufficient. We have to pursue subsistence. Ultimately, if other people control your food, you're utterly dependent on other people. There's an admonition from Paul. I didn't find it until just a couple years ago, but I can't miss it now. It's 1 Thessalonians 4:11. I think it's 11 and 12. When he says that everyone should seek to live quietly or peacefully, depending on the translation. Work with your hands so that you will not be dependent on anyone. Did I quote that close enough? And there's a couple other words in there, but yeah. That kind of self-reliance is biblical. I mean, God wants us to be, because what are we ultimately dependent on when we're depending on the land is we're dependent on the Creator. So there's a rhythm there that he wants us to be part of. So that's number one. I'd say pursue subsistence, even if it's only like 1% of what you need. Just do it. Don't because something is not a final solution, don't avoid starting. Start somewhere and see if you can grow it. And that would be the same thing for you trying to build a home-based business. Start somewhere and then expand upon it. That's a good business principle anyway. The second thing is in terms of, so the next 5 years, the funny thing is that those stats that I quoted on jobs, that's the slide there with the robot waving at all the goodbye to your job. Those stats of all, like half of all those jobs, those are white-collar jobs. Blue-collar jobs or trades are projected to increase by 30% over the same period. And what is that? What are we talking? We're talking about craft, basically, quality, things that can't be replaced or generated by a computer or printed from a 3D printer, the kinds of things that require craftsmanship, that are custom kinds of labor, that are unique to a situation. I think there still will be opportunities. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for white-collar knowledge work. That's going to be out there. But even those are going to be relegated to very unique creative situations that robots can't automate. And so I would focus on those kinds of things that require either you to do it in person here and can't be outsourced, or there's always going to be a demand for something that's authentic, that's crafted, that takes actual generational skill to produce. I don't see, like, for example, woodworking and furniture making. I don't see that going away. We already can crank out, IKEA furniture in factories. We don't need AI for that. That's already being done. But you still have the handcrafted oak slab, kitchen tables and chairs, and selling for thousands of dollars. In another presentation I have, there's a woodworking furniture store. Furniture makers, woodworkers in our town and where we live, and they sell, a credenza $6,000, and it's like, that's just slabs of maple, screwed together. But it's not that. It's not that. It's incredible amount of skill to make really quality pieces, and it's a thriving business. And so that's kind of where I would go with that. So some of the things, like my number one trade is shepherding, working with animals, either for subsistence or for doing something, pastured animals or things like that. That's a very viable, long-term, thousands of years. It goes all the way back to Abel, who Abel was named after, who's sleeping in the back of the room right now. He's a keeper of flocks, right? And so you have shepherds, people who work with animals. They're unpredictable. They're not as amenable to automation as things like crop farming, industrialized farming in that way. Other things, midwives. These are things that, robots are probably not going to be replacing real soon. You got some legs before that's going to happen. So those are a couple things. I don't want to go through a whole list right now, but those are all what I stacked in the book, and you could even just look in the table of contents and look really quick before you go. I think we're up against it. Rory, what do you think? Do you have any more? I don't want to keep everyone too long. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up. I'll be here for a little while. Be happy to take any of your questions. Thank you so much. You've been very gracious with your time. I appreciate it. And God bless. Have a good night.